We're here for the annual inspection of the 1978 Cessna 210. And this year we're dealing with the airworthiness directive that addresses the main spar of the aircraft. They had one aircraft in Australia that had a fatal crash due to the failure of the main spar. Now that aircraft had a lot of hours on the airframe. I think it was 16,000 hours on the airframe. And the aircraft also had many, many modifications, including auxiliary gas tanks on the tips of the wings. The aircraft was used for pipeline patrol, and there was corrosion on the spar, and the crack did start where the corrosion was. So corrosion was a factor. The other factors would be the high time airframe, and possibly they had many modifications on the plane, including a long tail boom that came out the back end of the plane, alterations up in the engine compartment, and that. So all Cessna 210s with certain serial numbers have to be inspected with eddy current. All right, so this airplane has a cantilever wing, and that means there is no strut out here from the wing back to the fuselage. So when you don't have a strut, you have to have one beefy beam, one heavy-duty, strong beam, and that's what this airplane has. This beam has been cleaned up so that we could look for cracks or corrosion. And they just did the eddy current inspection, and it did pass with flying colors. This airplane has been stored indoors most of its life. Some of the other aircraft that had air conditioning, the pressurized 210s, had air conditioning lines that ran back here, and there was a lot of condensation from the lines. So there was always a lot of moisture back here. And then aircraft that stay outside, sometimes the skins leak or there's condensation, and the condensation collects on some of the insulation, so you have a constant environment of moisture here contributing to the corrosion. So this spar, now that it's passed the inspection, will be anodized, and then there will be a clear coat of epoxy paint that will go over it so that we can still inspect the spar for cracks or corrosion. We had to send the oxygen bottles out. There's 4 of these bottles in the ceiling of the aircraft. 2 of them are large, and 2 of them are small. And it's hooked up so that 6 people can have supplemental oxygen when you're flying in the higher altitudes. The bottles had to be sent out to be recertified under the Department of Transportation rules, and it has to be hydrostatically tested, where they pump up the bottle to make sure that the bottle doesn't expand too much. Anyway, they put a stamp on here, and the stamp signifies the date, and the bottle is now certified for 5 years, good for 5 years. And we'll do a leak check before we put them back in the aircraft. Okay, so all the bottles have a valve, and inside the aircraft the valve is open all the time, except for the master bottle, and this is the one that's controlled by the pilot. This lever right here goes into, it's this lever right here goes to the inside the cockpit, and the pilot can turn on or off. All the bottles are hooked together in series, and the pilot can turn the system on and off right overhead. It works out really well, and there's a lot of oxygen here for a long, long trip for 6 people. All right, so this foam goes underneath the oxygen bottles that are in the ceiling of the aircraft, and then the headliner is actually below that. Now this to me looks like original foam back from 1976, and we thought that not only is it all beat up, but it's kind of lumpy, and it'll give the headliner kind of a lumpy look. So we ordered a new piece of foam, and take a look and see if it looks good and if they sent the right, oh yeah, there it is, look at that. Okay, so now and this is also for soundproofing as well. This keeps the cabin quieter, so this is really nice. This is going to look nice, and we'll probably cut it to the same, use the old foam as a pattern and cut it, but this is nice and dense. That should give us some nice soundproofing and maybe even a little bit of temperature insulation as well. So that'll look nice. The headliner will look a little bit nicer. That's ready to go. All right, so we're continuing with the annual inspection of the 1976 Cessna Turbo 210. And one of the things we do every 2 years is replace the battery on the ELT, which is the Emergency Locator Transmitter. On this aircraft, the ELT is located in the aft end of the plane. You see an orange box, that's the ELT. The battery is inside that box. And it's designed so that if there was an impact, a crash or an impact, that will send out a signal on the emergency frequency of 121.5. Additionally, there's a switch up in the cockpit where the pilot can manually turn it on. So let's say that you ran out of gas and you landed somewhere, you didn't crash, so it's not going to go on automatically, but you want somebody to come and help you, you can turn that on. All the airliners monitor the 121.5 emergency frequency, and it'll only be a matter of minutes before somebody reports that they hear an ELT, and they have a way of using triangulation to find out or figure out exactly where you are, and help will be on the way. So here's the switch where the pilot can manually activate the emergency locator transmitter, or the ELT. And you notice there's a cover on it so that you don't accidentally bump it with your foot. So to activate it, the pilot flips up the cover, and then there's a toggle switch down here. You just lift it up. I'm not going to do it because it'll set off alarms. All the control towers monitor the frequency, and there are certain regulations as to when you can test it, what time you can test it. So we're not going to do that. Okay, so the one squawk that we did have on this aircraft was, or it had to do with the heading of the aircraft. One day we taxied out and we got on the runway, and we were on runway 25, and the heading was like 17. So on this aircraft, it has a heading system, and it's a slaved system, but you can unslave it, which we did, and we skewed it over to the correct heading, and then we slaved it again. But every time we flew, it was wandering further and further away. So troubleshooting, we discovered or theorized that the problem was the KG-102, which is in the back end of the airplane, just below the emergency locator transmitter. A lot of avionics are located back here because there's not enough room up in front of the panel. So back here, the KG-102, the round portion or the cylinder portion is actually a gyro. And then the other box is the electronics. And that actually sends a signal up to the panel to the pilot's directional gyro or compass. And we did take the old unit out. We took it to Mid-Continent. They did bench check it, and they called me within 20 minutes and said, yes, your gyro in this unit is no good, and none of the circuitry is working either. So we had them, we bought an exchanged unit and put that in the aircraft, and we're hoping that that will take care of the problem. All right, so here we are up in the cockpit of the Cessna 210, and this is our directional gyro, or DG. And it has a nav flag and a heading flag. When those red flags appear, that means your heading information is unreliable for whatever reason. It's up there now because everything's turned off. And so the KG-102 in the back of the aircraft sends a signal up here. There is no gyro up here. It gets all of its information from that KG-102 in the back of the aircraft. Now, when the heading flag comes out, the first thing I do is I come over here and I look at this box. And that white indice should be right in the center, telling me that the slaving mechanism is working correctly. Now, if it's not in the center, I can unslave it by deselecting that button, and now I can manually skew it until the white bar is right in the center. And after I get it in the center, I usually slave it again. And that should take care of the problem. Sometimes you'll get into areas of magnetic disturbance where you might have to come over here and do that procedure where you unslave it, you manually slave it to the correct position, either right or left, and then you reslave it like that. The problem that we had was that none of this was working. It was going off to the side, we had the wrong heading, and we were unable to fix the problem by manually slaving it ourselves. So now we hopefully will be back in great shape. All right, we're getting ready to get this airplane up in the air to do a gear swing. The plane has to get pretty far up in the air because the gear drops down and then comes back up. So we need some good ground clearance before we can do a safe gear swing.
1, 2, 3,
All right, so here are the weights for the tail skid. This is necessary because the center of gravity for the aircraft is forward of where the main wing jacks are. So we jack up the plane, normally the nose wheel would just keep going down. So we have to add weight and hold the tail down so we can jack the aircraft up in a level configuration. All right, we're going to hook the external power cart to the external power receptacle because putting the gear up and down puts a big drain on the battery. You'd probably only get maybe 4 or 5 swings before the battery would be depleted. So we'll hook up the external power cart and we're ready to start our test. So the annual inspection for the Turbo 210 is completed. This year was kind of a busy year. We had to do the eddy current inspection on the carry-through spar, and the good news is that there was no corrosion found on the spar. We also did the hydrostat test on the 4 oxygen bottles that are in the ceiling. They're good for another 5 years. New ELT battery. One of the things that came up that my mechanic discovered was this is the retractable step, and it's hooked via a cable to the nose gear. So when the nose gear goes up, the retractable step goes into its little compartment. We found that the cable was frayed, and the frayed cable wore out the nylon pulleys, and we were afraid that possibly if the cable broke or came off the pulleys, it would interfere with the gear retraction system and possibly have a problem getting the gear down and locked or even getting the gear up. So we replaced the cable, and quite an expensive cable. It was like a $1,200 cable. The little nylon pulleys were $125 a piece. Aircraft parts are expensive, as many of you already know. The year after this plane was made, Cessna decided to completely get rid of the retractable step, and there's plenty of other ways to get in the plane. You can step on the tire, you can step right here, and I have to say that I haven't seen too many passengers even use the retractable step. So other than those items, it was a pretty normal annual inspection. They did the gear swing, the manual gear swing, everything was lubricated, checked for cracks and corrosion, and we should be good for another year of safe flying. Stay tuned and please subscribe. We have some interesting videos coming up. We're doing the next chapter of the Bonanza barn find. Piper will resume her flight instruction, and we have some other interesting trips up north to look at other aircraft, and it should be some good video viewing. Thanks for watching.